I'm that person that shows up 5 minutes late to their own party and acts like it's intentional. Oh yeah. And that's the thing with Sane and Simple podcasting is I want you to do podcasting in the way that is the most you. And showing up 3 minutes late for my own live is very much so me. Hey everybody, we're going to talk about the difference between audio podcast and specifically YouTube video podcast episode title differences today. I have more notes than I have time for, so this might turn into a few different videos. And I am really looking forward to seeing you in the chat room, seeing your questions in the chat room and or afterwards, because I think this is something that we take for granted, that we can just do the same thing on both places. And I know I talked about this in the last live session a little bit, but the more I think about it, the more I want to talk about it more. So if you do end up in the chat room, do say hello. I'm actually going to pull up the chat room chat box. That sounded weird. And that's fine. I'm the chat room chat box so I can see when you post something in there. Okay, just a quick check to make sure everything's going. The live is going. We're on YouTube as well as over on LinkedIn. And I actually did what I said last week of recording I didn't record two different versions of the live, but I did edit the entire thing down to a very different kind of podcast for the audio. So I think if you go over to Sane and Simple Podcasting, you'll see what I mean as the difference between especially a live YouTube video versus the audio version. It's very different, and I'm very happy with what it looks like. So as of right now, the audio is going to be an overall summary with some tips, but nothing visual, obviously, because I'm not going to make you go to another platform. The video will be the full live. It's kind of, I'm prepared, but there are things that are going to dishwasher. There are things that are going to come out of this that will be organic. Let me turn that off. Only during the live would this happen. There are things that will come out of this that I'm not anticipating. And that is the beauty of live. And those, some stay, some go. And then the Substack is where I'll have more of the listing kind of things, the instructions, and I'm going to start putting in a deeper dive kind of element to it that I haven't quite figured out what I want that to be just yet, because that is the nature of that platform. Let's get into titles today. I have a couple of examples that I want to share with you, and I've really talked this out with Chatty because I had some ideas and then I bounced them off of ChatGPT because that's what I do, and we came up with even more reasons why these are so different. I don't think the text is going to look good on the screen, and so I'm not going to do that necessarily. Am I? I always say that and then I always go against it. So let me see if I can add this on there. Hi there. If you're in the chat room, please do say hi. I'm going to be comparing audio podcast and YouTube video podcast titles, episode titles. Why? Because you really want your search visibility on both types of platforms. Podcast apps have a very different function than YouTube search area, the search function does. So let me see if I can get my episode titles up here. If they look okay, I'll keep them, but I'm okay. Now it got rid of me. So let me do this real quick. Yeah, that's what I had a feeling. With the vertical lives, it's not going to look that great. So I'll just say them verbally, I think. I don't know. Is that useful for you? Let's try that a little bit and see what happens. The cold that does not go away. Okay, so what I did here is I've got the original podcast title in giant form, and then I've got the audio version and then the video version. And I'll talk you through why they are different. If you're in the chat room, let me know if you can actually see those, if you can see those okay, or if they're just too tiny and I should just get rid of them, because I'm just not convinced that's super useful. Okay, So here's the deal. This is from my oldest podcast called Geopats. I thought it was sunsetted last year, but I keep wanting to restart it. There's some life things that are happening that's making that hard. But basically, there's 100 some episodes on there. And they are still getting traction in audio form, but not as much on YouTube. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to really play with the titles in the two places to make sure that the titles were strong enough to get attraction on the audio platforms, the podcast apps, Apple, Spotify, and all of the many, many, many other podcast apps, as well as over on YouTube. So here's what I did. The original title was Book Culture in Prague, Czech Republic with Mel and Dave from Strong Sense of Place podcast. An amazing podcast, by the way. So what I did is this. On podcast apps, when you search for a podcast and you find it and then you look at all their episodes, you have about maybe 3 or 4 words that you can see for each episode, especially if somebody has the episode number first. You have about 3 or 4 words if you're scanning all of the episodes. You have about 3 or 4 words that you can see as you're scanning, and the rest of the title is hidden. So I really I've learned to really front load the keywords. And the keywords are not front loaded here. Like in this example, book culture. Okay, books are a keyword, but honestly, right now in 2025, with location being super important to a lot of folks who are wanting to change countries, I think location is going to be more important than books. Like books, coffee, the internet, those are the themes within the podcast. There's some other ones too. There was a language theme and different ones. These are the things that grounded us in the places that we moved to and lived in. But honestly, I think the place is going to be the allure, and the thing that helped us adjust to that place, I think, is going to be the bonus. So I really want to switch it up and make the place more important. Now, the Czech Republic is in this transitionary period where they changed their name to Czechia, and some people are still using Czech Republic and some people are using Czechia. I did a search. It looks like more people are starting to use the new name Czechia, which I'm probably saying wrong, my apologies. So I'm going to put that first. So I have Czechia book culture with strong sense of place. Mel and Dave are fantastic. I adore them. But just their first names isn't really going to help with search. Again, I'm thinking of search. What are people going to search for? They might actually search for strong sense of place podcast. And if they do this, and they look in if their app has, like I use Podcast Addict, and my app has podcasts, and then it has a different search area for episodes. If they're looking at episodes, this would actually come up in a search where people are looking for their podcast in episodes, which would be amazing because they're on this podcast. So it is not their podcast, but it is a podcast that includes them. So if somebody was looking for information on Czechia or podcasts about Czechia, they would get this one. Now, book culture is also in that first 3 words. So that's really good too, because books might attract people to the episode as well. That might be something that they search for. You're going to hear the word search so many times in this video, in this live. Again, if you're in the chat room, please do say hi. Because search is what I'm thinking of. Search visibility is the term that Chatty kept using that I completely forgot existed. Search visibility. You really want people to be able to search and find your episodes. Search and find your episodes. You want to be there for them. I also like to be creative with words, but that doesn't help with search visibility. So these are very practical and sometimes possibly boring titles, but they're things that are going to get people to the episodes. So that's the audio one. For the YouTube video for that, I have discovered Czechia's book scene, a chat with Mel and Dave of Strong Sense of Place. Now, one thing that Chatty kept mentioning that I knew and that I started to write like this on YouTube and titles, but I hadn't actually explicitly realized. I've never said it out loud to myself while I was writing my YouTube titles or picking ones from vidIQ or TubeBuddy, which are great resources, whether you get the free version or the paid versions, is sometimes YouTube has a call to action in the title. Podcast episodes generally don't do that, depending on the type of podcast. But generally speaking, audio podcast episodes they're more, I wouldn't say formal, but they're more professional and they're more informational. Whereas YouTube videos have like explore, don't miss out. Like they have these call to actions in the episodes. So I wanted one in this one because I really wanted people to do something with this video. And it's actually a static image video. It just has the Geopats logo on it. And then it's the audio version of the podcast episode. But still, I want people to have that call to action that they're expecting from a YouTube title. So I have discover. That's the call to action. I want them to go and discover this in the episode. Chechia's book theme, a chat with Mel and Dave of Strong Sense of Place. You can already see between the audio and the video. Look at this. Look at how much shorter the audio title is from the video title. Now, again, you don't have, because YouTube is a visual medium, it'll be a little more truncated on mobile for sure. But if you're looking at the desktop site or someplace wider, like the TV, like YouTube TV, they can actually see the full video or the full title, or at least more of the title than they can on a podcast app. So you've got some advantages with your YouTube title that in space that you don't necessarily on podcast apps. And I know you can look at Apple Podcasts and Spotify on a desktop too, but I really think that most people are using actually, I can probably prove this if I went into Pod News and researched some of their data that they have, because they have such amazing data about the podcasting space in there on that newsletter website. But my hunch is that podcast apps, that most people use podcast apps versus web platforms for podcasts. Tell me if I'm wrong down in the comments below. I'm happy to rescind that hunch. But that is one thing that we were talking about, ChatGPT and I, is that Apple and Spotify both have a 255 character limit, but most podcast episodes are about 60 characters. Now, if you're like me, you're like, well, what is that in words? Depending on the word length, it's about 8 to 12 words. And funny enough, YouTube has a 100 character word limit. Again, Apple and Spotify have 255. Most people use 60. YouTube has a 100 character word limit, but most people use under 60. So they're about the same, supposedly. But with that added call to action norm on the YouTube episodes, it does give you the ability to make it longer to fit the style and the tone of YouTube episodes. Like people will be expecting more bang in the episodes on YouTube than they will on their podcast app. You're not expected to be like commercial, like, hey, get this, do this. That's not a thing in audio podcast titles generally. Again, depending on the type of podcast. If you have a very flashy, loud, exciting kind of like entertainment podcast or something, that might be different. But for most podcasts, the tone is going to be very different with your audio title, with your YouTube title. If you're putting the same title on both of your podcast episodes on YouTube, as well as on your audio file or your audio podcast episodes, and you're seeing one do a lot better than the other, I would look at which style you're doing for both. Are you doing more of the podcast simplified informational podcast episode title? That's such a long descriptor. Are you doing more of that? Or are you doing more of the call to action, like, whoa, kind of commercial, pushy kind of YouTube title? If you're doing one of those for both places, mix it up. Do more of the different ones and see if that changes things for you. See if it helps your search visibility. All right, so what else? We talked about front loading your words for the audio version. We talked about the call to action, front loading the words there. We talked about the call to action, often existent in the YouTube titles. We talked about character limits, more professional versus casual. More professional is the audio, casual is the video. And discoverability is the name of the game as far as we go. Look, I'm not an SEO specialist. I don't, because SEO, search engine optimization, generally speaking, is much more of a website related skill, right? However, I have had things found. I do get attention onto my things online by focusing on keywords, by focusing on what people are searching for, by focusing on discoverability. So, and this is what I've learned, especially the differences between audio and video. And I'm telling these to you right now because so many people are taking their audio podcast and putting it on YouTube, or more so, and I have a new client who's doing this, taking their video podcast and putting it in audio form. And when you're doing these things, you really need to pay attention to where they live. You wouldn't have, oh, I'm going to do a bad analogy now. You wouldn't have like, every coffee analogy I have ends up not being good. Okay, you wouldn't have a pizza in a third wave coffee shop unless it was a unique pizza that was super specialty. You wouldn't have a fast food restaurant located within a third wave coffee shop. It's a different vibe. It's a different audience. It's a different clientele. It's a very different experience between the third wave coffee shops and the fast food place. You might have them next to each other, but that's not the same business. Same thing with audio and video and YouTube video. Also, disclaimer, information here. I'm only talking about YouTube video because I generally don't do a lot with Spotify video or any other video platform. YouTube video is big enough for this sane and simple girl. So I'm pitching my tent there, and that's where I generally put all of my video energy into, is over on YouTube. And I started on YouTube and in podcast, and I started a podcast and a YouTube channel at the same exact time, this time of the year in 2017. So I am familiar enough with YouTube where I'm just happy to stay there. So that's why I'm just talking about videos on YouTube. There are other places to put your podcast videos, but we are saying in simple podcasting. And if we're talking about multiple video channels, you're much more of a video podcaster or a video content creator than you are just a podcaster wanting to make sure you're discovered in some video platforms. That's my take on that. All right, so again, if you're over in the chat room, do say hi. I would love to hear from you. So that is the first example, is that book episode with Mel and Dave of Strong Sense of Place. Right, so let's look at the second example. Let me put some more space in here so we can get only that one. Okay, so the original title was Becoming American with Our Immigrant Parents with Chelsea Chi. Chelsea is a dear friend of mine, and I interviewed her for this 4-part series on, oh, hold on. Let's get a question in here before I dive into that one. Let's see. So the question is, apologies if you've already said this. Is it bad practice or potentially confusing to listeners to have completely different episode titles for the same episode on different platforms and completely different episode art versus thumbnail? Really good question. It just says LinkedIn user, so my apologies for not adding your name. I'll add it to the audio version in post if I can see it on LinkedIn. Okay, so here's my take on this. I'm doing these things for discoverability. So I'm assuming that most listeners are not going to listen and then go watch the same episode. Does that make sense? Like, I'm assuming if they are looking at, if they're starting with audio and then they're going over to, actually, I want to remove that. There we go. If they're starting with audio and then they go, oh, I also want to watch it. If they go over to YouTube, I don't think that happens. If they start on YouTube and then they go and download the episode and listen to that as well, I just don't think that happens that much. Again, I'm focusing on that search visibility. Will people find you if they search on these platforms, either audio podcast platforms or over on YouTube? Will they find your episodes with the titles that you have? That's how I'm viewing this. Now, will they be confused if they do want to? Let's say you do have a video first platform that has some visualness to it that you did not remove when you scrape the audio and put it in audio form, and then they are listening to it and they're like, well, I'd really like to see that, and they go over to YouTube. Honestly, I think people are really smart. I think they'd be able to figure out, hey, that was in this month, or this is a similar title to that. Or maybe you would actually even put, I don't know that I would do this anymore. I used to have the audio link in the YouTube video area and the video link in the audio area, but I honestly don't think people usually switch between the two or listen to both. But I think people would be able to work it out, because it's not like if we look at the first one again here, if we look at the first example here, all three of these are similar enough where I'm not really changing the title completely. I'm just doing the things to make that search visibility higher. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not completely going off the rails and changing every single word or the main idea in there. But I also think people would be able to go by dates. If they see that the episode came out last week and they go into your videos and they can see that it's a similar title and a date that was about a week ago, I think they'd connect the dots. If they did, but I don't think most people are transferring over. Let me know in the comment section if you get a lot of people that actually consume both versions of your podcast, because I would be very curious as to why they're doing that. What's happening in the other versions that they're double consuming it? And by what's happening, I don't mean that's automatically bad. I'm just very, very curious, because I think most people get pretty attached to the one way that they're used to consuming content. I have a friend who only watches things that are on YouTube, and if they don't have a video version, even if it's static image, she just doesn't watch it. I have people that only listen to audio stuff, and if it's a video version and doesn't have an audio component, even though they could just listen and ignore the video, they just don't. And there are people like me who are in between and who watch and listen on both platforms. But I rarely go from one version to another unless that visual element thing is in there, and then I go, never mind, I'm going to go watch the video. Or if the video doesn't have anything visible and I need to go for a walk, then I might do the audio. But I think I would actually start them out knowing that initially. Yeah, so I'd be curious. Or go ahead, you're on LinkedIn. Go ahead and DM me on LinkedIn. I would love to have a conversation about this some more, because I am very curious. That's such a good question. Oh, such a good meaty question. I love it. All right, let's move on to the second example. So, Becoming American with Our Immigrant Parents with Chelsea Chi was the original title. It wasn't terrible, but it just didn't seem to be concise enough. And I adore Chelsea, but she's not a content creator like I am. She doesn't have a strong online presence. She has a strong IRL presence in the areas that she maneuvers where she lives. And so it didn't really help. Like, people aren't going to be searching for her generally online. So that's not going to help find her episode. So I needed other ways to help people find this episode that she was in, which had some really beautiful moments about growing up with an immigrant parent and then moving abroad and being an immigrant parent herself. So I really needed to kind of delete her name from the title. It's still in the first sentence of the descriptions and all of that, but it's not in the title anymore. What is Becoming American Together, Immigrant Parent Stories. I'm still not 100% on the new title, but I think it's better. All 4 of the episodes in that season are actually immigrant parent stories, and that's the only reason why this title still needs some work, because I still need to tease out a little bit more of what's unique about her story versus the other 3 stories. And I just laughed because one of the stories is actually my story of growing up with immigrant parents. And this is one of the seasons I would like to actually do another season of. I'd like another 4 people to talk about growing up with immigrant parents and then becoming an expat or immigrant overseas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But if you know anybody who fits that bill, or you are that person, please do contact me. I'm itching to keep going with this podcast. Okay. And then so again, I front loaded the keywords for the audio version. I made it more professional sounding, and I made it more search friendly, and I made it shorter. For the YouTube version, my call to action is more of like, I want them to answer this question, right? So I have, how did her German mother shape her American experience? Now that I'm reading it out loud, I don't like the double her. So I might actually put Chelsea's name back, just her first name in there, just to make the her clear. Maybe. I don't know. I need to think about that. But how did her German mother shape her American experience? So the call to action is really the answer the question, which is not so subtly implied in the how. And then the search terms that are early on or in there at all are German mother and American experience. Chetty and I had a long talk about how to represent that, the heart of the episode. An American experience is a search term that is apparently used a lot. So I think if people were searching for American experience stories, they would come across this episode on YouTube. So that was a key phrase that we wanted to keep, that I wanted to keep in there. Chatty didn't have an opinion. They just had ideas because Chatty's not a person. So again, there's a little bit, they're almost the same length this time, the audio and the video titles, but what's in them is still different. The audio is still more informative. The video has a call to action. It wants people to answer the question, and to answer it, they have to go watch the video. That's not an accident. That's intentional. The call to action is what gets them to press play, hopefully. So, and the tone difference. Becoming American Together, Immigrant Parent Stories is more formal than How Did Her German Mother Shape Her American Experience, which is less formal. I just got to think about that double her in the YouTube one. I was mostly writing back and forth with ChatGPT when we were talking about this more than speaking. And yeah, so that didn't come up. So I want to play with that some more. But I like German mother as a search term and American experience as a search term for the YouTube one. And so now I'm going to wait and see. Does that actually get more traffic onto that YouTube video on the Geopats podcast YouTube channel? So, and those are the two examples that I have for you as far as audio and video differences for the titles. Now, there's a lot more that you can optimize on both the, let me get this off the screen now. Stop sharing. Okay, there's a lot more that you can do with There's a lot more you can do with title optimization that has nothing to do with the title. Let me do that again. There's a lot more you can do with episode optimization that has nothing to do with the title. For example, in the podcast app, you can have keywords, you can have metadata in the audio. I'm having some really good traction with a new client who wasn't using metadata, and we now put it into the file. I have an entire video on that. I'll put it in the show notes or video notes, depending on where you're consuming this. Having the metadata in your audio file as part of it, so when people, again, search, they find your episode because you have the information there for them to find. On YouTube, the first sentence or two, I forget exactly how long it is, but the beginning of your video description should be keyword heavy, that describes what's coming in the video, not just throwing keywords in, because that's part of what the algorithm uses or the platform uses to determine if they want to. And this is a term they used in the YouTube live I went to last week about algorithms, where they use that information to match the viewer with the videos. Isn't that the best phrase ever? I feel like I'm going to use that for the rest of the time that I talk about YouTube. In the history of time, in the history of the future. That makes no sense, but I feel like that would make a good movie name, In the History of the Future. Anyway, take it and run. I don't have any claim on that. But my point is, YouTube matches the viewers with the videos, not even with the channels anymore. Oh my gosh, I got to do a video on this soon. But it was really good, a really good live. If you are new to YouTube, I highly suggest you get you like get onto the mailing list where they send out information about their live events, because they're super good and they always answer questions during them. That's it. So we're focused on search visibility for your podcast episode titles, for audio platforms, and for YouTube, specifically YouTube video platforms. How they're different, how you can massage them pretty easily using ChatGPT. I didn't show you me using ChatGPT for this because it was mostly text, and that just does not look good in a video live. But you can easily use ChatGPT for this. Yeah, you just can. So, but always check the information. Don't just take what it gives you. Like prompt chain and go through it step by step by step. I still have 100 some episodes to redo. So if you actually want an example of how I did this with an episode, I think I have one where I did just YouTube videos. I'll link that in the show notes as well. But if you want one where I specifically do the audio and video episode title changes, let me know in the comments below, and I'm happy to make that video for you. All right, that is it for today. Whew. That will take you a while to do that to all your episodes, right? It's going to take me a while. So I have a new section in my worksheet, my Google worksheet, where I have redid audio title, redid video title, YouTube title, because it's going to take a while. I'm not going to have this all done next year. It'll take a while. But every time I optimize these, that gives the search visibility. It increases the search visibility. So if you add it to your worksheet, every time you work on a new video, fix something from a previous video. When you work on a new audio version, fix something from a previous audio version. It's the only way I can do backlog maintenance. I don't know about you, but if I have it in tiny steps included with the content I'm currently creating, that's the only way I'll get it done. I will never sit down and do hours and hours and hours of backlog creativity. It's not how my brain functions. If it is for you, totally cool. Next week, I am going to be talking about, I just wrote it down and I forgot because I got deep into this episode thing. I made a trailer this week for this Sane and Simple podcast. And there's a lot of information that I forgot about trailers, and I want to share that. And the best way to do that is to do a live next week. So I'm going to talk about elements of a trailer, important things to remember, and where to put it once you have it. And I have a really exciting growth moment that happened yesterday with the trailer that I'll share then. So next Thursday, how is this April? Oh my gosh, April 10th, 2 p.m. Copenhagen time. Timeanddate.com has a wonderful meeting planner if you need to find the time in your time zone. I'll be back to talk about episode trailers. So that will cover ChatGPT, because I did use ChatGPT to brainstorm some. That'll cover editing, because we'll talk about editing the trailer for a certain length. It'll talk about promotions, because you're going to use that trailer to promote, share, and get your podcast out there into the world. And of course, we can probably touch on YouTube, because we then need to talk about, does that become a video over on YouTube, or is that just stay in its audio form? So we have a lot to talk about next week with podcast trailers. Until then, my DMs are open on LinkedIn, and you can go to coffeelikemedia.com if you want to leave me a message offline. All right, bye.